The wind carried whispers through the trees, a sound like distant voices calling a name too faint to understand. The couple had moved into the village seeking peace, a quiet life away from the chaos of the city. But peace was an illusion here, something fragile and deceptive. Their new home stood at the edge of the woods, an old house with thick stone walls and a history no one in the village wanted to discuss. The first warning came from their nearest neighbor, thus an old woman who visited them the day they moved in. She stood at their threshold, hands folded in front of her, her gaze heavy with something unsaid. "If you see the child," she told them, "do not speak to it. Do not let it inside. No matter how long it stands there, no matter how pitiful it looks, do not acknowledge it." The couple had laughed it off then, assuming it was some strange rural superstition. But the old woman's words would return to them, creeping into their thoughts as the days passed and the nights grew longer. It began subtly, the feeling of being watched even when the windows were shut, the sense that something lingered just beyond their sight. They would wake to find small, wet footprints on the porch, the pattern of bare toes pressed into the wood as if a child had stood there in the rain. Once they caught a glimpse of movement through the trees, a small figure standing too still, its shape blurred by the mist that rolled in from the hills. The woman felt an unease she couldn't name, a deep, crawling sensation beneath her skin. Her husband, ever the skeptic, dismissed it. "Just some local kids playing tricks," he said. "It's nothing." But she noticed how his eyes lingered on the footprints a little too long, how his fingers tensed when he passed the windows at night. Then came the tapping. It started late one evening, a soft, rhythmic sound against the glass of their bedroom window. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the pattern was too deliberate, too patient. Tap, tap, tap. When she dared to lift the curtain, her breath caught in her throat. A child stood there, barefoot in the cold, its face obscured by shadows. It did not shiver. It did not blink. It simply stared. She backed away, whispering her husband's name, but when they looked again, the child was gone. That night, she dreamed of whispers, voices threading through the darkness, telling her things she didn't want to understand. The next morning, she found the footprints inside the house. They trailed from the front door, which had remained locked all night, leading up the stairs and vanishing at the threshold of their bedroom. Her hands trembled as she traced them with her eyes, feeling something shift in the air, something unseen but undeniably present. Her husband's reassurances sounded hollow now, his voice strained as he tried to convince both of them that there was nothing to fear. But fear had already settled into the house, curling into its corners, waiting. The nights grew worse. The tapping became more frequent, sometimes at multiple windows at once. The humming began, a low, tuneless melody that drifted through the walls, seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The woman could feel it beneath her skin, vibrating through her bones like an echo of something ancient. She started locking every door, every window, stuffing towels beneath the gaps, but still, she would wake to find things moved, small, wet handprints smudged along the walls. The whispers in her dreams became clearer, and though she never remembered the words upon waking, she carried the weight of them throughout the day. One night, in the thick silence before dawn, her husband broke. "Maybe we should just talk to it," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Maybe it just needs help." But the woman knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that the child did not need help. The child was waiting. It was always waiting. She pleaded with him, begged him not to open the door, not to look too long, not to break the only rule that kept them safe. But he was unraveling, worn down by sleepless nights and creeping dread. When the next knock came, gentler this time, almost polite, he stood. And before she could stop him, before she could scream his name, he whispered, "Who are you?" Silence. A silence so deep it swallowed the air from the room, so thick it pressed against her ears, her chest, her skull. Then a breath, soft and shuddering from the other side of the door. "I am you," it whispered. The door creaked open, just an inch, just enough. She did not remember the moments that followed, only that the house seemed to breathe, that the walls flexed and shivered like something alive, that the floor beneath her feet felt too soft, too warm, like flesh. When she turned, her husband was gone. The door hung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond, And the child was standing there now, inside, its small mouth curved into a silent smile. She did not scream. She could not move. Morning came, and she was alone. The house was quiet, the footprints gone, the walls still and lifeless. She searched for him, calling his name, but only the silence answered. When she finally stepped outside, the old woman was waiting at the edge of the trees. Their eyes met, and the woman felt something inside her fracture. The old woman only nodded, as if she had seen this before, as if she had been waiting for it. That night, the tapping began again. Soft, patient, persistent. She did not look. She did not answer. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her chest, that if she opened the door, she would not find a child standing there anymore. She would find him, and he would be waiting, silent and smiling, just like the ones before. It began as static, a faint whisper through the speakers of an old radio, a frequency no one had touched in years. The signal was weak, distorted, like a voice trying to crawl through the cracks of reality. James thought it was interference at first, just another broken relic in the abandoned station. Then the voice spoke his name. The hairs on his arms stood on end. His fingers trembled as he turned the dial, but no matter where he moved it, the voice stayed, faint, lingering, calling. The old radio station had been shut down for nearly a decade. James was only here because the city wanted an assessment before demolition. A simple job: photograph the decay, list the damages, and leave. But now something was talking to him. He stepped back from the control board, his breath shallow. The room was dim, the only light seeping through the cracked windows. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by something unseen. And the static continued. James. The voice was warped, stretched like a dying transmission. He swallowed hard, his name. It had said his name. His fingers hovered over the switch. He needed to turn it off. He needed to walk out and never look back. But then the voice spoke again. Don't go. His breath hitched. The radio crackled, the static deepening. Something shifted in the air. And then, beneath the distortion, he heard breathing. Not his own, something else. Something waiting. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed closer, and then the lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, the reflection in the dusty glass showed him something wrong. Not his own shadow. Something behind him. Watching, waiting. The static surged, the air thinned, and then silence. James did not turn around. He did not breathe. The voice had stopped. The lights flickered again, and then the radio turned itself off. He stumbled backward, heart hammering against his ribs. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen. And then from the darkened corner of the room, a click. A microphone turned on, and a voice, clear, close, too close. We're still here. The tape should not have been running. Everything was unplugged. The equipment was rotting. The station had been abandoned for years. But when James checked the recorder, the reel was spinning, and something was being recorded. His breath came shallow. The whispering had returned. It was no longer coming from the radio. It was coming from everywhere, through the vents, the walls, the broken speakers hanging from the ceiling, voices overlapping, layers of static. Not one, not two, dozens, hundreds. A chorus of whispers trapped in the dead air. The words were unclear, shifting in and out of understanding. Some were pleading, some were laughing, some were screaming. James staggered back, the floor creaking beneath his weight. The voices swelled, and then the microphone moved, not by his hand, by something else. It turned toward him. A single voice broke through the chaos. It was his own, but distorted, warped, speaking words he had never said. It's too late. The reel spun faster. The air hummed. Something in the room shifted. And then, all at once, everything stopped. The radio was dead. The tapes were still. The air was thick with silence. But James knew. He was not alone. He left the station before nightfall, his hands shaking, his mind unraveling. He did not tell anyone. He could not. But something followed. At night, when he turned off the lights, the static returned. Through his television, his phone, the dead channels that should not exist. And then, the voices. They whispered through the silence, the same words, over and over. We're still here. And somewhere, deep beneath the noise, he heard himself. Speaking words he had never said, on a broadcast that was never meant to end.